If you're ready to dive deep into the captivating world of crime, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community of curious minds. Together, we'll uncover the mysteries, challenge the norms, and ultimately seek a deeper understanding of the human condition. Thank you once again for being here. Get ready for an unforgettable adventure. Let's begin. Joseph William Kappen was born on 30 October 1941. Also known as the Saturday Night Strangler, was a Welsh serial killer who committed the rape and murder of 3 teenage girls in Aldersea and Tamar, near his hometown of Port Talbot, in 1973. Kappen is also suspected of committing a 4th murder in February 1976. Kappen's confirmed victims were all 16-year-old girls, who he lured into his car on Saturday evenings in Briton Ferry and Swansea, respectively. All 3 were driven to rural locations, where they were subsequently raped, then killed by strangulation. Kappen was never arrested for his crimes and died of lung cancer in 1990. Kappen is notable for being the first person ever to be posthumously identified as a serial killer via familial DNA profiling. He was also the first documented serial killer in Welsh history. Joseph Kappen was born in 1941 and had 6 siblings. His parents' marriage broke up when he was young, and he was raised by his stepfather in Port Talbot, a heavily industrial town in Wales, dominated by its large steelworks. Kappen began attracting police attention for petty offenses at age 12. He went on to accumulate over 30 convictions for car theft, patrol theft, burglary, and assault, and spent years in and out of prison. Kappen alternately worked as a lorry or bus driver, and then as a bouncer. He never stayed in employment for long and was described as a loner. In 1962, Kappen met his first wife, 17-year-old Christine Powell, and they married in February 1964. 10 days after their nuptials, Kappen was sent to prison for burglary. Christine then gave birth to a daughter, and then to a son, Paul, after she was raped by Kappen after his release from prison. Christine later testified that Kappen was physically abusive towards her and would rape her every 2 weeks. At one point, he fatally strangled the family dog in front of his son while walking it on a nearby beach because it was too old. Kappen was known to regularly pursue local teenage girls during the marriage, with his job as a bouncer giving him an opportunity to interact with them. When working as a bus driver, he was known to use his rest breaks to approach teenage girls on the village green at Llandarcy. In 1964, Kappen attempted to force himself on a 15-year-old schoolgirl in his Sandfields housing estate, but she escaped. In February 1973, a man resembling Kappen picked up 2 female hitchhikers and drove them to a nearby isolated road before attempting to rape both of them. But they also managed to escape. The victims did not report the incident, as one thought she would get into trouble with her father. On Saturday, 14 July 1973, Sandra Newton, age 16, went missing after a night out in Briton Ferry. For 3 days later, her body was found raped and strangled in a rural location some miles away. 6. Stag Newton had been abducted after trying to hitchhike home after visiting a nightclub. She was strangled with her own skirt and dumped in a ditch near a coal mine in Tonmore. 6 little attempt had been made to hide the body, with it being left at the entrance of a culvert. Fife police suspected a local man was responsible due to the detailed knowledge of the area the killer would appear to have needed to be aware of the remote dump site. 2 months later, in the early hours of Sunday, 16 September 1973, 10 Geraldine Hughes and Pauline Floyd, both age 16, hitched a lift home after a Saturday night out at a nightclub in Swansea, Lillevenon. The next morning, they were found dead, their bodies being found raped and strangled in Llandarcy, Woodland 5 miles away. 11/6, it appeared that one girl had attempted to escape from her attacker, and had made it yards from the road near to where her father had worked, but had been caught by her attacker and killed. Zessex, the murders created a sense of fear in the community over whether the attacker would strike again. 11, although they occurred nearby. At the time, the murders of Hughes and Floyd were not linked to the similar murder of Newton. Police soon established that Hughes and Floyd had been seen getting a lift home in a white Austin 1100 on the night of their disappearance. Police followed up numerous lines of inquiry, but, as was the case in police investigations at the time, all intelligence and information was collected on large amounts of paperwork, which complicated the inquiry. The Port Talbot Steelworks employed 13,000 men, all of whom had to be considered as potential suspects. Both the construction of the nearby 4 motorway and the ongoing Neath Fair meant hundreds of itinerant workers had to be considered, as well as the countless strangers these events brought into the area. Attempted to trace men who owned an Austin 1100 in the area, but it meant that more than 10,000 drivers had to be visited and questioned. The 3-day working week imposed by the British government on everyone across the country, as a result of an energy shortage, further reduced the resources of the inquiry and hampered the investigation. However, one of the men who was investigated as part of inquiries concerning the Austin 1100 was Kappen, who owned that model of vehicle. When police turned up at his home to speak to him, they found his Austin was on blocks, with its wheels removed, with Kappen claiming that he could not have committed the murders as his car was not roadworthy. However, in the days after the killings, Kappen's car was logged as being on the road by police carrying out stop-and-check operations. This would have disproved this claim, but without a computerized system for cross-referencing, this fact was not noticed by detectives at the time. Kappen also claimed to have been at Neath Fair on the night of the murders, and his wife gave him a false alibi, which she later said was common for her to do when police investigated her husband. Ultimately, therefore, Kappen was not pursued further as a suspect at the time. In mid-1974, the investigation was scaled down. Around this time, there was media speculation linking serial killer Fred West to the murders, as he once worked in Landarcy. But this was swiftly ruled out by police after the DNA was checked. 35,000 persons of interest were initially identified for DNA testing, but a psychological profiler was employed to reduce the number to a priority list of 500. 50 of these were witnesses, relatives of the victims, stepfathers, boyfriends, and anyone who had featured prominently in the initial investigation, and the others were known criminal suspects. Kappen was listed as suspect number 200, and detectives visited what they believed to be his address in Port Talbot in August 2001. But they discovered that he had died of lung cancer in June 1990, although his former wife, who had divorced him in 1980, still lived there. Due to the period of time that had elapsed since the murders, South Wales Police decided to employ a previously unknown tactic of searching for the DNA of possible living descendants of the murderer, as their genetic profiles would be similar to the killer's. 50% of an individual's DNA is inherited from each parent, so investigators believed that they could discover who the killer was by making a partial match between the killer's profile and that of any children they may have had. Investigators therefore examined local individuals' profiles that matched part of the killer's profile and created a list of 100 potential suspects. One of these was local car thief Paul Kappen, whose DNA was already on police files, but who was only 7 years old at the time of the murders. Paul's profile showed a distinctive similarity to the killer's, prompting police to make his deceased father Joseph, known to have been investigated in the original inquiry, the prime suspect. The findings of the DNA testing led detectives to apply to Home Secretary David Blunkett to exhume Kappen's body in order to confirm through DNA that he was the murderer, which was granted. In 2002, the body was exhumed from Goitre Cemetery on the outskirts of Port Talbot, with it being said by witnesses that a thunderstorm suddenly passed over as the exhumation began, and that a large thunderclap was heard when the ground was first dug up, suggesting to them that they had unearthed evil. Kappen's family consistently denied that he could have been responsible for the murders, and claimed he was innocent, despite the evidence. Forensic testing on Kappen's remains subsequently established a perfect match to the murderer's sample, finally proving beyond doubt that Kappen was responsible for the murders. South Wales Police declared the case closed. The now elderly surviving parents of the victims expressed relief that they had finally received a form of closure, with the mother of Hughes stating, "Now we can close the book on that hell forever." After the findings, Kappen's former wife, Christine Powell, who had previously insisted that Kappen was innocent, stated that our first thoughts are with the families of the victims. Our concerns are protection from hurt for our children. We are all deeply shocked by the revelations. The Kappen investigation was the first in the world to utilize familial DNA tracing in order to posthumously identify a serial killer. 2004. Another similar attempt to identify a serial killer through familial DNA was made by Strathclyde Police in the Bible John case, when they announced their intention to test a number of men after the discovery of a DNA sample at a minor crime scene in 2002. This sample showed an 80 match to the profile they had from the killer, which implied that the offender was a relative of Bible John. Police also re-examined the 1973 disappearance of 9-year-old Christine Markham from Scunthorpe, after learning that Kappen had worked as a lorry driver in Scunthorpe and had lived in lodgings in the Humberside area soon after the girl vanished. However, serial child abductor and killer Robert Black remains the prime suspect in the Markham case. After he was finally imprisoned in 1994, police announced their suspicions that Black had committed a number of other murders and their intention to investigate him for murders, including Markham's. Kappen is also suspected of having committed numerous other unsolved rapes. A crime is a crime. It will never have a reason or an excuse, but the reasons for criminal behavior are complex and multifaceted, often varying from case to case. While it is not possible to provide a definitive answer that applies universally, several factors can contribute to the commission of a crime.